Welcome to part 2 of the exercise, where I would like you to print out this form that you find below and then start filling out what you need to balance out. Now, we all have certain charges. We have certain issues that we are not at peace with, let's say it that way, where we see a lot of drawbacks, a lot of difficulties, and we really haven't looked at all the benefits because we haven't associated them with the problem. So what we do is now we just collect them all and build up all those little arguments like Plato did until we come to that point of conclusion. And that's why right up on top, what has already transformed to the good since I've been diagnosed with cancer, since I have Lyme disease, since my husband left, since my child passed away. You know, whatever your main charge is, and really pick something which has grunt so that you have a lot of emotional charge against it, and then we look for the benefits. And that's what you do. You break it down. What has already transformed, and then you go through all the different areas that have changed. For example, spiritually, since I've been, and then whatever your problem is. So let's just stick with cancer for that purpose. And I'll share with you one case that came to me. It was one of my very first. I just had this form, I had everything ready, and then a client booked with me and she came in. And I didn't know that beforehand when she made the appointment. She was carried in, she was skin and bones. She was in a very, very final stage with cancer, and she came in and said, Marcus, I would like to know the purpose of my disease. What did I have to learn? And it was kind of an overwhelming, scary moment at that stage because I wasn't confronted with such a person. So I was in doubt, do we find enough of the benefits? And so we started. And when I said, what has already transformed spiritually to the good since you've been diagnosed with cancer? And spiritually, there was not that much. We couldn't really come to a lot of points. Yes, she's learned, she's joined yoga groups, she's joined different communities. She actually found spiritual companions from her yoga, but it was all very single-sided from that area. And the guy who brought her to my place was actually one of her yoga partners. So it was kind of a little bit of benefits, and we went through, and this is something that I want you to do. Really simple. When you come up with a benefit, you know, in regards to spiritual, what has she read? And I made you some points here. You know, purpose, learning, interaction, new friends, self-value, choice, clarification, being looked after, self-empowerment, all of that just so that you have a little bit of a trigger for your mind to look for certain things. So she found great companionship, that she could talk about her problems, which she was never able before to do, because it was always like, we have to hide our problems, and that's how she grew up. So she had that. And just make one line for a benefit that you see. All of a sudden she came up with and said, actually she found a lot of peace in that constellation of being with those people, because they have a certain faith and a certain belief of reincarnation in this case. And she studied that. She started to learn about books and read some of the books. She was actually introduced to the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which she had to read 5-6 times because it was just not there. Then somebody told her to start reading the book from Deepak Chopra, you know, Knowing God. A beautiful book. When you understand the principle of Vedanta, then his book makes a lot of sense because it's all taken out of those Vedantic scriptures. So as she went through, we had, let's say, 20, 10, 15 points in that area. And they were pretty clear. She realized, oh yeah, I wouldn't have done that without. I wouldn't have been in contact with that. So there was not a lot here. When we talked about relationships, she said, can we pick that to a later stage? Because it's something I feel very uncomfortable to talk about. And I said, yeah, let's go on with health. What have you learned? Now, she was a brain surgeon and traveled around the world, was very highly paid to do brain surgery. And she was helping a lot of people, but she was kind of totally isolated. She didn't know anything about the patient, but the diagnosis and the condition. She was flown in, she did the surgery, very, very fine motor skills. Whatever she did was exceptional. And then she left. She never had contact with the client. She never had anything. So in that regards, she said, I know so much, but I had no clue about dietary issues. So she learned that. And as you see here, we have in the physical area, diet, lifestyle, exercise, clarity of mind, detox, sex, hormones, companionship, self-empowerment, which all belong into that physical arena. So as we started to work through here, we had 50 points that she came up with that she learned in regards to diet and lifestyle, in reading about her disease, looking for the emotional factors that come from her liver cancer, which it was. So it was a poisoning of the body. Poisoning is always related to a poisoning of the mind as well. So there were many things. And like I said, we started, you see the image, I think further below is a small image that I posted. That was her chart. There was like plenty of points that we could fill out in regards to health. She's read a lot of books. She was going on a detox, unfortunately way too late. Her liver was, I think only 10% still working. The rest was diseased. So there was big problems. She had already surgery. She had already that high radiation of the liver with heat treatment and all the things. So the liver was just not to be rescued anymore. And it was at such a state where her whole body deteriorated. But she learned a lot. She learned a lot about all her sex life as well, which was a consuming, no connection to the person, not being associated with the person, which really indicated that this was where the main problem in her life was. But we just stuck with what she wanted to talk about here, because sometimes you can't go directly to the root problem because people bury that so much and really don't want to talk about it where the main benefit came from. So as I said, we went through here, hormones, companionship, self-empowerment, all of that, and we had quite a number of points. And then we went into education, and that was where you realize that there was a massive drive to prove that she was really the best, that she was good. She had studied all her life, and when she had the disease, she's been going through hundreds of books and courses and seminars and online, and then she went through all the alternative stuff. She studied, she learned. So there was a lot that she gained from it, but it was all driven by a desire to prove that she's in charge. And she probably hasn't noticed it by then, but I did. So as we worked through, it was really like, oh, so much learning, so much proving that she was right. She did every single therapy exclusively to find out whether it really had benefit. So she had research on her own and with clients on all the different treatments, whether they worked and how they worked and whether there was actually an influence and whether the supplements were effective. That was outstanding, diligent research and proving, because she wanted to prove that she can heal herself and then she can heal everybody else. Dedicated to be in charge. Again, that's a relationship issue. So we really found here that she had gained a lot, but it was not that big breakthrough that came from it, the big gratitude. And then we went on to finance. Finance was not an issue. She was so wealthy and she had so much savings and income and everything and insurance. So she was very well set. Maybe we could find two benefits, I think when I remember well, she said she learned to value money more. All of a sudden she knew that buying health actually has real value. So there was some insights that showed her that when she made the insurance beforehand, it didn't have a value. Now it had. So investing wisely, planning your health in a proper way. So there was a few points that we could find, but it was certainly not overly dramatic. And then we went into the social factor, and social factor was a very different thing. She was very isolated, again coming back to relationship, very isolated, coming into the room, didn't know anybody, just a few of the staff members that she had requested. And then she was doing surgery and then she was gone again. Very, very isolated, no contact with patient, didn't want any contact. So in regards to social leadership, she hadn't taken on any students, she hadn't taught any classes, she hadn't done anything. When she started to be diagnosed herself, changing the position from being the person that is treated to the person that is treating, that was a big shift. So she learned to associate with patients. Again, more a relationship issue, but we found plenty. She was teaching, she was presenting her research papers, all the different things that she'd found out was all of a sudden something that she wanted to share with others. She joined communities, she joined self-help groups, she was associating with other patients. So there was a lot that she did that was very effective in her life. And like I said, every single time you have an insight, oh, this is transformed, make a line. It's more that you see in front of your inner eye and that you don't stop before you have at least 20 benefits. And then if you look at social, purpose of socializing, new environment, inspiring others, teaching, ripple effect, like how much effect do you have on others when you share something? When I share something which I'm full, my heart is overflowing and I need to share that with you, like this is a subject that is dear to me, and I share that, it might not have a massive influence, but you pass it on, and there is that ripple effect. And she studied that very much, so she had plenty of things that she found out where she could pass on information and knowledge about detox. She was very strong in that liver flush and liver cleansing and liver support and all of that, and she's discovered plenty of things that she was able to pass on. So social was really strong. She also, because social has also to do with your creativity, she formulated papers and wrote those papers really great. So again, there was plenty of things that we could list here that had come from the disease, which she'd never done before. And vocational, that was kind of a collage because she couldn't work anymore. And in the beginning, she shifted her work away from that isolated doing her job, more into doing something which was more for the better of mankind instead of better for the individual, without ever asking, how did it work out? Did they have a great life afterwards? There was no connection. So that was changing as well. So her career was drifting into a complete different connection. And I said, look, we've now covered all the points and you still have no feeling of what actually was important. Let's tackle relationship. And she said, okay. So what has changed in your relationships since you've been diagnosed with cancer in your case? And she said, well, I had no connection to my children. I have 2 children. They were living with a husband, and we had very little contact because I was just traveling all the time. I was out and about all the time. And once I had my diagnosis, I felt drawn back. So I connected and I took them on journeys and I took them to different countries. I wanted to show them a lot of things. So relationship with kids, if we just break that down in kids and then husband and parent and just that alone. And then we went through. So what was the teaching that you could? Take her children overseas, show them what was important, teach them about her life, socializing with them, associating with them, teaching what you wanted them to know about life, what was important. So there was plenty. And as we went through just the kids and her association with the kids, she started to soften up and she started to cry. And there was I think we had at least 30 points that really were clear, especially with her little one who was craving for mum and she was never there. And all of a sudden she could spend the time and just sit and cuddle. She said just sitting with him and cuddle was already enough. You didn't need more. And that was quite fascinating. So that was it. And I said, what about husband? Well, same thing. She worked out deals with him. They traveled together. They found back together. All of a sudden, she was able to speak with someone, first person, to speak about. So husband I think we had not more than 10 points. It was not like massive charges. It was like the divorce was because she just couldn't connect. And then we came to parents. And she said, well, actually, if you say it like that, and if you ask me like that, there was a massive change. And I hadn't seen my parents for over 15 years, or almost 20 years. I've been moving out when I was something like 17 because they passed on the family business to my younger sister, even though I was in line. But they said I wasn't suited for the business, I wasn't good enough, and so they knocked me more or less into a study or into school, and my sister was taking over. So I felt degraded, I felt not loved, I felt whatever. So I moved out and traveled around the world and studied and proved to myself and the world that she was worthy. Once we hit that point, you can realize there was like coming home to parents with her diagnosis. She was standing 8 days in front of their house, in the car, sitting in the car, not being able to go in, not being able to, fear of reconnecting, fear of realizing that actually there was no bad intent. She was the one who left, and they just looked after the business, who was more suitable. So there was a lot of misunderstanding, and she realized that. So when she came home, her mother opened the door. They had great relationship. They built up. They discussed all the points. The sister, who had a million bad conscious situations, resolved and helped her out. The whole family got back together. And then I think the biggest point that came was her father. He had dementia. He had Alzheimer. He couldn't remember anymore. So Dad was in a retirement home, and everybody visited him, but he didn't recognize anyone. And when she walked in after 18 years, 17 years, he stood up and embraced her and recognized her. Just talking about it, that moment when she realized what the purpose of her disease was, to bring her back to the family and to get back into that stage of, appreciating everybody for who they are without judgment, not feeling the victim, not feeling painful. That was the huge crack point. And at that moment, she started to cry. And me too. And the guy in the room too. It was that big breakthrough. And we were all sitting there. And she sat at that moment, and you could see everything was dissolving. The only reason why she had to experience, why she had to go back, was actually to resolve this emotional charge. And it was incredible. Once she realized what she had missed out, what she had gained through coming back, and having the possibility, someone to look after her. Her parents afterwards took over. They looked after her, they cared for her, they brought the children back in, grandparents having relationship with children. We could have done here hundreds of those little 5 blocks just out of every situation that had unfolded. It was amazing. So this was her cracking point, where she realized there was purpose in disease. There's many things that transform, but there's usually one that we don't recognize, that we don't want to associate with the problem. Problem there, benefit there. And yes, they are both existent, but we haven't connected them. That one was driving the other. And that was one of the most, for me, changing moments. And since then, I've done this with hundreds of people. And every single time, and I really appreciate if you do this exercise with a partner, with a friend, with someone that you trust, that pushes you across boundaries, because your mind has negated this fact for such a long time, hasn't associated it. And someone who is outside, who is neutral, they can trigger those points a lot easier. I wouldn't take, the person that you have the problem with into the room, because that just causes, that old habit of opposition to flare up. But someone who is neutral, who maybe just listen or just takes the paper and says, okay, in that relationship area, what about your new friends that you made? And realizing, and that was another factor, she was, as you realize from her profession, completely isolated, no connection with patient, no connection with contact. Isolated, no teaching, no social environment, no education that she was giving. She was isolated. And that was because she had fear of being hurt, fear of being disappointed. So that was one of the main triggers. So all of a sudden, all her yoga friends that she made and the social contacts and all of those things, they just started to flood out of her. And I kept her going. We didn't stop when she had those tears. We kept going until she really sat there and you could see there was no reason to talk further. It was that moment of silence. When you hit that moment of silence where you realize it's all perfect as it is. There's nothing to be changed. At no given moment, there's nothing but love in any situation, because love is unconditional. And that means I don't have judgment of good or bad. I just am. When that moment kicks in and you go into that state of white light, she was completely at peace. And that's what I wish everyone to experience at least once in life. That's what monks work for in hours and hours and days and weeks and months and years of meditation to get to that moment of bliss, complete stillness, being in the now. Now you can expedite that process by going through an exercise like this. You balance the mind out. When you come to peace with the situation, I can share one little exercise with you, which we had. A mother lost her child at the age of 2 years old. It just slept and didn't wake up. Breathing problems and asthmatic problems. And afterwards, and this was probably even worse, they found out that the mattress that they used and the blankets and everything was dipped in flame retardant and, highly toxic. And because it was nicely shielded, the toxic soup of all the fumes was sitting down there. And every time she put the child down, coughing and breathing problems, and then the child died. And that was like bad conscience, plus all the pain of suffering that she couldn't share her love. And it was like devastating. And we went through this exercise, like what has already transformed to the good since your child has passed away. And again, at first there was nothing. There's just pain. That's the most brutal thing that could happen. And then we found out how many children she was helping, how many articles she had written, how much she's helped other parents to not fall into that same pitfall, how she changed laws, legal situation for the use of baby equipment. Phenomenal work that she's done. She created an association. They tested products. She helped probably 1,000 children to survive because she was adamant in resolving that problem, to deal with her bad conscience. And as we went through all the people that she had, the children that she had, the choice children, where parents came and said thank you or associated with her, that made up for her child. The spiritual factor of being at peace with giving that to the world was there. Health, what she had changed, what she had learned about, how she had transformed her whole home. When you wake up to toxic world, there's so much to transform. Same for everybody who is diagnosed with cancer. The transformation that comes and how you clean up the world, how you share that information with your family is phenomenal. So again, she learned here thousands of things and could pass them on. In her social field, becoming a teacher, sharing with the world, writing articles and all of that. Massive. So that was a massive explosion. She developed a career out of it and had actually financial support. She got massive donations for that. Perfect. A lot of benefits that came from that. Again, she was sitting there at one moment where she said, Marcus, I actually don't need to change anything. It was perfect as it was. That's exactly what you need to come to. When you have that feeling that anything, whether it's your nasty husband that you need to deal with every day, and that forces you to evolve, forces you to change something, when you don't get there, ask another question. And this is, my last example that I would like to share with you. A lady came to me and she is abused. She's really in a very bad condition. She still is. She is not brave enough to fight back, to step up to the task. Very spiritual, not spiritual, very dogmatic religious. And lives in the cellar in the house, is abused by husband and by children. Nobody invites her. She has to clean up, wash, but she's not allowed to partake in her dining room, sit in the common room when everybody watches TV. She has her own little room in the cellar of the house. Quite disturbing. And when she came, I was like, why don't you kick him in his butt? Why don't you throw him out? She owns half of the house. There was so much unclarity for me just to understand why she was enduring that. And it was all based on what is about to change since I have been abused, since I have been whatever. Many of us are knowledgeable. We know what we actually should do, but we're not brave enough. Now, when you go through the exercise first and say what has already changed, in her case, she really made a lot of friends and found support groups and joined support groups, helped others. There was like a lot of things where she already became important, not to her family, but to other families, where she could help out, where she was doing social work, where she was doing church work. she became important in those communities instead of her own. So it's always, if somebody challenges you, there's somebody that supports you. It's always there. You have both equal at any given moment. It's another thing we need to look at. So we found plenty, so there was benefits, but the main benefit of standing her ground, standing up to the task, and declaring her self-value and saying, no more, that's it. I'll take it to the lawyer, we split the house, you can pay me out or I can pay you out, not a problem, but I don't live under those conditions. Declaring her self-value, I don't want to be talked to in this tone. If you have this language, not to me. I won't listen, and out. You know what every normal person would do. And that was like at the doorstep. She knew it. I know I have to. I know, but I'm so scared and I wouldn't be able to do that. And I don't have the money for a lawyer. And I said, well, ask 10 friends, do a fundraiser. You need the support because you're abused and you will find plenty of support. So it was all clear how to do it, but she was not brave enough to do it. 1 year later, she developed Crohn's disease. Another year later, she developed cancer. You know, when we suppress a task, when we don't step up into a task, what happens? The task takes over. You know, our body demands retribution, demands change. So it's like she refused that. And then finally, at a stage where there was no way, any way further, she was at the borderline. That's when she said, now it's enough. And I always say, you remember my motivation scale, friendly reminders, not so friendly reminders, and then you go slightly up. Well, that's pretty much where she had to go all the way through to the final destination, to the final big threat and critical situation for her life. That's when she started to act. And that's why I always say, how far do you need that meter to go up before you get into gear? Whether that's financial problems, health problems, or relationship problems, doesn't matter. In her case, she needed to go all the way up here to make that change. And once she did, and she stood her ground, and she's now moved out, she has a tiny little apartment that she can afford. She's secure for the next 10 years out of what her husband had to pay her for the house. Everything dissolved. And now children start to respect her. Children, her own children, invite her for grandkid birthday. They didn't do it before. When you stand your ground, and let's just face it, if I evaluate myself, I cherish myself, I say, look, I deserve this kind of respect, then they give it to you too. If you don't respect yourself, then they can't respect you either. And that's little things that the world teaches us. And that's what you can find out, where your issues are here, where the main problems are. And if you know exactly, this is what I still need to do. Like this lady who came to me, who was standing 10 days or 14 days in front of her parents' house. Let's say she hadn't gone in. Would that be on that list? What is about to change since I'm diagnosed with cancer? She knew that that was one of the points that she had to resolve. And finally, after 14 days, it was like her mum saw her and was waving when she couldn't stay in the car anymore. So that's when she walked in. And that was, the solving of her blockage, the solving of her disease. Whether that body still recovers or not is actually not relevant. You remember from what I said in the first video above, it's not important whether we live longer or whether we have more happiness or more sadness, which you always have both. It's about what we take into our next life, the charge. The emotional charge, the stress that we take into our next life is what then triggers such an event again, which is what causes you outfalling again. So when you resolve it this time, when you fall in love and see that it was necessary to push you over that boundary, over that line of going back home and resolving that issue, then it was worth it. And that's what I wish you too.